Good morning everybody and welcome back to another video where today I wanted to take a look at the Lego diorama collections, of course in the recent development of Z0093, the Lego Ganondorf final battle set from the Legend of Zelda. It has got me thinking about where the Lego diorama line has been, where the Lego diorama line is going, and of course for you Zelda fans thinking up some other ideas to put on Lego Zelda dioramas, as because I'm honestly a little surprised that they did not launch this as a two-piece theme, especially given the news that the Deku Tree is retiring in July of this year. Yes, you have me right, that is your reminder that the Deku Tree is going to be removed from shelves at the end of July, and that means that the Breath of the Wild minifigure and also the Breath of the Wild Zelda, as well as technically Young Link and a lot of those side builds, will basically be off the market, meaning they're going to be subject to aftermarket pricing, as well as, of course, there are no future sets currently planned on the horizon, although I doubt very strongly that we will not see that Breath of the Wild Link again, probably not with golden hair, but that's actually not the topic for today's video. The diorama line has been around in a variety of forms, but mostly gained prominence with the Star Wars line circa around 2020, 2022, as we saw a couple of different things start to come through as the Adults Welcome portfolio started to develop. To begin with, this didn't really sort of take place in the same form as we used to. I'm thinking the 2020 Comic-Con exclusive Bespin Jewel, which had some of the elements of the black bases, but we've also seen stuff like this from the Lego house sets, such as the dinosaurs through to the house to the brick molding machine around this time, and a couple of years earlier, of course, architecture technically following this pattern. But what really makes a Lego diorama to me is mostly the inclusion of the figures to recreate iconic scenes, mostly from IP movies. This was launched, of course, originally with the original trilogy of Star Wars. We had the Death Star Trench Run, the Trash Compactor, and then following up in various different years with Yoda's Dagobah Hut, and then my personal favourite, the Empire's Final Jewel Throne Room. We've then seen it cross across to other Spielberg properties and various different other bits. I mean, Indiana Jones was one of the most fantastic ones with this sort of added play feature elements, but still has the minifigures in the main build that has sort of put this together. And it was also the first one to step away from that rigid black base format that the Star Wars ones, such as the Mos Espa Pod Race and Endor Speederbike diorama, were still stuck to. And while Star Wars has now moved away from these things, we've seen diorama concepts, of course, be put into practice across other themes. Most notably, I think, was the Jaws set, which by surprise used the diorama setup for its scene. And then, of course, most recently, we've seen toyetic versions of this off the black border in Marvel, but we'll talk about those in just a second. I do also think it's worth noting that the Lego diorama sub-themes often don't quite fit into this subcategory. For example, there is an argument to be made that idea sets such as the Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory also counts as a diorama, as effectively it just recreates a scene from a movie that isn't on a sort of display base. Sure, doesn't have a quote or anything like that, but effectively functions in the same way as a diorama. It's just sort of a free-flowing one. But then again, when you start talking like that, that's half of Lego's portfolio these days. A slight exaggeration there for you. But of course, I'm specifically referring to the type that applies to 77093, and that, of course, being the Ganon final battle. Which is interesting because it's definitely falling into this sort of Adults Welcome profile, although it does not formulate the same sort of black base approach that we saw across both Jurassic Park and Star Wars, as well as Jaws, and then later on, of course, in the Indiana Jones line, which took a slightly more freeform approach, not using as much black and having some decorations around the frame, but was still very much relegated to a specific shape and border. This one still has a relegation of a border, specifically 2 plates of black in a almost hexagonal shape, where it's a half hexagon with a square wall along the back, and then this 3-sided shape at the front, which is in some ways similar actually to the Deku Tree, which also could be considered a diorama, again under those Charlie and the Chocolate Factory rules. However, this used a brick and 2 plate system, probably because of the increased weight, meaning it needed extra structural support to support it. However, it is interesting to note that there is no consistency between those 2 sets. Now, where the Deku Tree differs, and this wasn't originally supposed to be the case, as in the original leak, we actually saw a Legend of Zelda 2x4, 2x6 tile on the front with no direct quote, of course, probably due to Link's silentness, although the Deku Tree does indeed speak. But we did see a logo print originally on the original, which would have made the Deku Tree part of the diorama line by thesis. However, something that this new set has, which ties it more closely to this other genre of dioramas, is the presence of the Triforce at the front, which, as we recently discovered from the early reviews, is actually done in a way that you could pose all 3 of the minifigures around their respective piece of courage, wisdom, and power. Very cute, but the inclusion of this sort of metaphor audience element is what, to me, aligns it mostly with the diorama theme, although personally still kind of gutted that there was no Legend of Zelda logo attached to the tree. Doesn't matter, not really important for the sake of today's conversation. So, if I'm classing this as a diorama, how in fact is it different? Well, beyond the plate separation ideas, there are more of those play ideas or customizable ideas that have been mixed into this formula that has slowly been developing across the diorama subtheme over the last sort of half decade as such. I've already mentioned at length that the Indiana Jones set contained a variety of play features, and this Lego Zelda set does not go that far. However, with Ganon being removable, a feature that was expected to be fairly standard, the hidden heart containers underneath the ramp, the Megaton hammer being imposable, as well as having two different display options, and then of course the Ganondorf pop-up feature, this set is arguably significantly more playable and shares a lot of DNA with something to me like the Balrog book nook, which some of you are going to balk at when I suggest that, but the Ganon and Balrog are actually surprisingly similar, and I'm really looking forward to comparing them as both builds and characters come March 1st. What's interesting in that regard then is that this set straddles a line between a more active display role in compared to other sets, again taking a lot of imagery from the deku tree, which sort of required you to put some effort into thinking about how you wanted to put this thing on display. And as we said, you do have two options here, although realistically we're all going to go for the Ganon on the base option unless you're going to remove it from the base entirely. I do think that this set could have worked without the base, but putting on the base sort of targets the adults more because then they have some sort of space for it to exist in. I understand exactly why they have done this, but with those extra features, those are something that is considered usually redundant when placed on a display, especially given that most of the actuator, and in fact the most important actuator, is actually on the back. This is something that we saw not done in the Indiana Jones one, where the actuator is on the front, so that if you were showing this off to a friend or a family around the house, you would be able to sort of press the buttons really easily and demonstrate the features from the front without having to sort of get your hands around and mess with your shelf and so on as well. So in some ways, it really does lean more into the display side, and I think that's very clear, of course, with the fact that Ganon apparently is not particularly great at standing up like he can, but he's very much intended to be on the stand, which is something that we would not expect if this model was supposed to be equal parts play and display. However, we never claimed it was that, given that it is part of the diorama line. I think this is really interesting because there is a lot of sort of DNA and passageway that's going on here. There's clearly been some thought been put into where this fits in sort of the catalogue, as well as decisions made based off exactly what audience they're targeting. Do I necessarily think it was the right call? No, probably not. However, I do still love it to bits, and if this is all we're going to get, or are allowed to get, thanks to Nintendo, then I am more than happy, of course. Anyway, with the history of the dioramas out the way, I wanted to get onto the second part of this conversation, which is what on earth are we doing with this new mini sub-theme? Well, firstly, I think the most likely answer is nothing. I don't imagine that this format of having a Triforce at the front with a black base around it and recreating other Zelda themes is going to be continued. In fact, I imagine we'll never see it again. However, I believe that is the wrong decision, as to me, the most likely decision, and actually I'm kind of surprised that this isn't a dual release, is that a second version of this with the same through sort of half hexagonal side with the Triforce in the middle should have been released for Breath of the Wild. Now, we're going to talk about the other games in a second, because boy, oh boy, would I love to see some stuff for the other games, but let's talk about Breath of the Wild because the figures are still in production. If you remember, around when the Deku Tree launched and we started talking about what was next for The Legend of Zelda, I started to make motions about the figures being reused in smaller, cheaper sets, which is something that, while I never predicted a Ganon final battle due to the fact that it would need a new Ganondorf and a Zelda minifigure, as well as, of course, a load of recolors in the Ganondorf, I was aiming for simplicity. I never considered a Ganon final battle. I did motion to the concept of a Lon Lon Ranch display / diorama / set that would reuse both the young and old Link, just adding a new Malon or so on. And I also procured the concept of a Guardian battle against Breath of the Wild Link. Now, I offered up two versions of various different points, but with this new diorama, it fits one particularly significantly better than the other, and that is, of course, the trailer from, I want to say 2014, 2015, when we first had the Breath of the Wild design revealed to us, when Link rides through the woods on a horse being chased by a Guardian, crosses a bridge, jumps off the horse, and shoots an ancient arrow into the Guardian's eye. I can imagine it right now, with the Guardian sat on the left, but its arms sort of flailing, although I think we'd put it on the right just to mirror the Ocarina of Time one. Link in the air, posed above his horse, bow shooting down towards it, perfectly set up like a real diorama with a bridge sort of splashing everywhere. This thing is perfect for us, as another aspect of dioramas that we did not talk about was the two Ninjago monstrosity sets that released in 2025, which again are straddling that line between playset and display place, definitely more on the display side, however with a slightly younger skew and some playable aspects, specifically with the Fire Knight mech, as opposed to the other dragon one that we had. And I think this is sort of exactly where the Zelda one was going going just with these rounded bases, which was something we saw with Marvel, with the No Way Home set, and also the new epic battles that are coming out this year. And I also have to bring up the baseless movie-based scenes, which we had the Age of Ultron one at the beginning of the movie. We also just recently had the Civil War airport battle as well at the beginning of 2025, and I think these fall short for a different reason, because they don't lean enough into the playset style and often feel cramped. I do think it's worth bringing up, though, that I actually saw on a Tips and Bricks article very recently when reviewing the new Ganondorf set that they rated the concept of value in the Ganondorf set as worse than those Marvel dioramas. And while the price, I definitely think from a US perspective, probably aligns with that, I didn't initially see their viewpoint. However, upon looking at the footage from the early reviews, and I will reverse final judgment until I get my hands on this set, it does appear that this set is quite small. And although it has a sizable pre-scan and a lot of new molds that allow me to justify the price as completely fair, I do wonder if my perception of value on this set is actually perhaps subject to change in comparison to the Lego Marvel sets, which previously I've gone on the record saying that when you look at stuff like the Star Wars Throne Room Duel or the Airport Civil War Battle, that this represents better value despite the lower figure counts and somewhat less play opportunities. So I'm very looking forward to sort of evaluating that properly. But back to the question at hand, what are the future of these dioramas? So Breath of the Wild diorama was the one that made most sense to me. It's significant, it's important, it's still the most played games. I know, of course, we're going to talk about the other games, but it is still the highest source sales numbers. It would have made sense, and it would have sent some you had from the classic era as well as the new era on shelves at the same time. It also would have kept the Breath of the Wild link in circulation, and while I originally suggested years ago with the Deku release that I would love to have seen a dirty link with the praying dress Zelda and recreate the Guardian sort of final sacrifice scene instead of the trailer one, I'd be hard pressed to argue that the trailer one isn't super iconic and would allow them to reuse the Link figure that exists, which, as I mentioned earlier, is currently going off the market in July, meaning that figure is going to skyrocket in price as probably the most popular version of Link outside of the sort of classic Smash one. And the fact is that people are not going to be able to get their hands on him. Now, I no doubt that that figure is coming back with a different hair color at some point in another set at some point. I just don't think they give up this license. But it is crazy to me that this set is retiring with only a 3 to 4 month overlap from the release of the Ganon set. And furthering that point is retiring, meaning that this theme that has been given an entire page on Lego.com, which may have been a Nintendo contract thing but is not known, is only going to have one set on it for the majority of its life, which is crazy. I assume there's another one coming. Maybe this time next year we'll have another diorama and maybe I'll be proven right. However, let's get a bit fandomy, let's get into the weeds of things and think about other suggestions. I'll give a little shout out to Gryffindor Brickkid, who came up with the fantastic idea of doing a Majora's Mask diorama with the final battle from Majora on this same base. Keep the Triforce in the front, have Majora, have Skull Kid and Link as figures, Tail. You know, we've already got the pieces for that. We would reuse the young Link, another great case for another diorama that would make a lot of sense to keep a figure on the market. But let's say you wanted to get a bit out there and maybe pick something else. Well, of course, that brings us to, I think, another one that would suit itself really well to diorama form, and that is Wind Waker. Couple of options here. One I like significantly less is the idea to put the Ganon final battle from Wind Waker on here. It would basically a lot of weighted space. Half of it would be taken up with water. I do think it would work at a smaller format, but if we're keeping this hexagon or half hexagon as a sort of basis, I think the best option from Wind Waker is just a Great Sea diorama, specifically with Link on the King of Red Lions riding a surf across the sea. Maybe you add an extra boat that they're fighting or another boat that you can put off to the side to change some things out, but it does need to be a Great Sea diorama with a small island, maybe with Owl on it as your third figure there. I think capturing the essence of the Great Sea is one of the most important things to capture, especially in an adult Wind Waker set, and let's be honest, the most important thing overall is the inclusion of the King of Red Lions, which is sort of behind my decision-making process for Ocarina there. As for dioramas, I really do feel they lead themselves towards more action moments or specific set pieces. This is why you won't find anything like a Lon Non Ranch or a Clock Town on this list, especially not a Hyrule Castle or a Temple of Time. All of these are suited to individual sets and stuff that I'm honestly kind of still surprised is not even really on the cards. So realistically, I'm thinking of sort of action-based game moment and so on. I mean, if you look at one thing that I think is actually missing from this Ocarina of Time one, and that is the organ. So I do wonder if a Ganondorf tennis racket metal would be suited to the diorama format. Although I'll be completely honest with you, I think this would be better suited to just an 8-wide diorama or something really, really small. Would have been a GWP, I don't know. I would have bought a Ganon piano as a gift of purchase for the set. However, that is neither here or there. Yeah, those about outline the majority of the dioramas I think I have in mind. I don't really think there's anything too strong from Tears of the Kingdom that works specifically. Stuff like the Demon Dragon fight doesn't really work. The Ganon final battle doesn't really take place in an interesting location, unfortunately. I mean, there's arguments for Beast Ganon and Calamity Ganon. I think Calamity Ganon could potentially work quite well, but it's quite similar to the Ganon vibe, which is why I really like the Guardian idea. Gryffindor Brick Kid is definitely right with the Ganondorf one, and I think a Great Sea would make up the sort of other ones. If you've got other ideas, though, of course, let me know. Let me know what your hopes are for Lego Zelda in the future. As always, I continue to hold on to the hope that playsets is the answer. I realise that at this point it's probably a doomed ship to sail. However, that would be my dream come true, and they've proven that this line is a really high quality and things, and I just continue to hope that cheaper sets are being made. Let me know what you think of the diorama concept. Let me know if you think this set is set to disappoint or not. I am very, very excited, but just a tad concerned for what it's going to be like in hand. But of course, I will be revealing all that from you as we get closer to the time and I get my hands on the set. And of course, we will be doing a long review as well as some upgrading things. I've got some things in the works, as well as some other bits of content as we prepare for convention season. I'm going to be building and streaming, so check an eye out on the channel and watch out for 2 big instruction drops coming over the next month as we prepare, of course, for Ganondorf, but also just in general, Castle is coming. So I'll see you guys around. Let me know your thoughts down below and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.